certain heroes lend themselves to breakdowns. Logan, Iron Man, Daredevil. We love seeing these heroes struggle at their lowest point. But one iconic creation sees himself almost exclusively portrayed on the verge of physiological or psychological collapse. Batman was created from conflict. His origin and the duality of a shattered psyche and infinite wealth is such a compelling premise that the most famous Batman books feature the Dark Knight in varying states of decay. Nightfall, Batman Returns, Killing Joke, Long Halloween, Year One, Hush. All of the biggest Batman stories are about Bruce Wayne at the end of his rope. One of the more well-known books, Year One, largely due to the coloring by Richmond Lewis and the characterization of Bruce Wayne by Frank Miller, is a classic example. Bruce starts his career in Year One as Batman. The narrative focuses on Jim Gordon and Bruce finding their feet in this new Gotham they've both found, and Bruce is slowly unraveled by his new mantle as the Dark Knight. In the penultimate moments as Batman and Gordon come face to face, Gordon lets an unmasked Bruce go. It's a powerful climax because Batman is at his most vulnerable, and it's only the compassion and poor eyesight of Gordon that allows him to go free. The book's iconic not just because of what happens, but because of the larger mythos behind the stories. This book, among Miller's other work, forms the more ethical, egoist-driven Batman that found its way back into circulation in the late 80s. We can't have this conversation without mentioning Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand outlined her ideal hero, one characterized by radical individualism, intelligence, and self-control. Almost a perfect character sheet for Miller's Batman. Miller reintroduced a Randian brand of Batman that would go on to become the characterization we see more often than not. It's also little surprise that Ayn Rand's work had a heavy influence on Zack Snyder as well. The characterization of Bruce Wayne in Batman v Superman is spot on with Rand's vision, fitting given the film lent heavily on Miller's Dark Knight Returns as a source material. The Dark Knight Returns follows a retired Batman as he claims back the city from the mutants and gangs who run rampant over Gotham. During a blackout and on the precipice of war, Batman and the new Robin make Gotham the safest city in America. Batman is then targeted by a jealous Ronald Reagan who orders Superman to dispense of Batman. It's the ultimate clashing of egoism and collectivism, and the ideological friction forms the internal conflict of the story. It's a great book because it takes these characters' ideologies to their extremes and then puts them in each other's path. It's fantastic. This ideological challenge to Batman's Randian heroics forms the backbone of the most compelling stories in the mythos. It's not just the physical trauma. But something happened over the years as this version of Bruce Wayne became less and less relatable. Most comic book readers were teenagers and young adults. They couldn't identify with a billionaire playboy. Something needed to change. As the 90s approached, the Batman films grew more and more campy and over the top, and because they were live action and for everyone, the darkness was pulled back, and so was the violence. Bruce Wayne was reduced to being a rich guy who dressed up in a costume and saved Gotham from one city-ending peril after another. It wasn't until Batman, the animated series, that we saw another definitive take on the mythos. The show was so iconic and well-received that it changed the source material it came from. Being more adult-orientated than its live-action counterparts, the animated series featured emotional and physical violence that was unmatched in any Batman show or film. The animation's distinctive style would go on to define Batman art for years to come, but it was the treatment of guns, hand-to-hand combat, and villains that separated the show from anything we'd seen before. Batman wasn't always dealing with freeze rays or penguin bombs. Most episodes it was criminals with guns or corrupt politicians. The show found a moral center through its more grounded violence, but challenging Batman ideological in and out of the costume was the thrust of the series. Bruce was a more rounded, interesting part of the story, and he had more to do than just get in his costume and beat up thugs. When he was the head of a multinational company, he had to actually think and be an active part of the story. Life in the Cowl affected life as Bruce Wayne, and Batman's antics had a real impact on Wayne Enterprises. There was no more perfect hero, it was a complicated mess, and it was compelling. Decisions were made by Batman for subjective reasons, no more objectionism to avoid ambiguity or a genuine challenge to the character's core beliefs. It wasn't just throwing a baseball for the Randian hero to hit out of the park. There was a real contest that challenged Bruce Wayne's ethical foundation. We even started to sympathize with villains, and so did Batman. We saw this treatment of Bruce who had a heart, and that empathy made him relatable. Batman, of course, still instilled fear in criminals, but he also tried to understand them and empathize. The animated series had the best of both worlds, and it's a masterpiece that holds up today as some of the best cartoons ever made. The best Batman stories understand this and leverage the physical trauma and challenges to Bruce's ideology together. Nightfall sees Bane pummel a sick, tired Batman with challenge after challenge. Finally, Bane confronts Bruce at the Wayne Mansion and shatters his spine. This imagery is so ingrained in our culture that we've seen the moment repeated in countless mediums, most recently, of course, in Nolan's Dark Knight Rises. The following book saw Bruce grapple with finding the strength to return to the cowl, and it's only when he comes to a moral epiphany that he can overcome his physical trauma. Hush, another universally praised story, largely due to Jim Lee's art, is a one-shot about Bruce's past failures being rubbed in his face by a vindictive, dying Riddler. And in the end, despite his anger, Batman empathizes with him. Even on his worst day, a bloodied, exhausted Batman understands pain and loss and violence. He's one of the few icons who grows out of his Randian heroics and into a more rounded, interesting character. While Batman is a hero and often an anti-hero, there's something satisfying about seeing him in these all-is-lost moments. I think it's because we know that Batman, above all other characters, will grit his teeth, clench his fist, and make the more difficult choices. He might not do what's right every time, and reading the comics when I was growing up helped me realize from a young age that the delineation between good and evil isn't a sharp edge. There's room for error. There's a lot of grey. Comics and comic book films teach us why heroes matter. They remind us that we should try to do more with the gifts and opportunities that we do have. We're obsessed with breaking Batman because even when he's bent out of shape, he always comes back. He never gets broken for good. And now more than ever, we need to see that people in positions of power will respond to adversity with courage and fortitude, not cowardice and fear. We need to be shown examples of leaders who acknowledge that the world isn't just right and wrong. Not every Muslim is a terrorist, and not every Catholic hates homosexuals. We need to be reminded hardships lead to the creation of extraordinary forces of good. In the wake of the Second World War, it wasn't despair that took over, but it was the hope for better that created so many comic book heroes. There was a desire to strive to be more. No one remembers the presidents who gave in to tyranny. We remember the ones that stood up and said, no, we will be better. We're not supposed to be like Batman. Most people aren't millionaires or at the peak of human athleticism. But we can learn from Bruce's educated empathy and unending determination. Now more than ever, the world needs something to aspire to. Even if it's nothing more than a broken person deciding that tomorrow, no matter what, they'll get up and try again. The Antagonist is me, David McNeil. Our music is by the incredibly talented Daniel Larson. We are produced by Digital and Creative Media Works. Head to patreon.com/DCMworks to support us. Ben Hill is the drive home after a 30-hour flight.